Hi, I'm Jay Thomas, and welcome to Bald Tires, a proud member of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. You're listening to episode number 24 called Road Trips. If you haven't heard episode number 23, take a listen to that first. It'll probably make a lot more sense of what we're going to talk about today, as this is the second half of my interview with Tim Roden. Today, he's joining me to talk about road trips, some of our favorites over the years, as kids, as families growing up, and then as adults as well. This is also the final podcast of 2021. Big thank you to everybody who's been listening this year. It's been a great journey for me, but next year we're getting even bigger and better. I got to thank Chad with Shield Coatings in Saskatoon for joining me as our title sponsor starting in 2022. Thanks for listening to Bald Tires, because when you make great memories, you make bald tires. The Saskatchewan Podcast Network is supported by Connexus. Next time you're stuck in traffic for a while, here's some things you can think about instead of why the car in front of you is going so slow, or the one behind you is trying to hitch a ride on your bumper. What if your bank was committed to working with you to achieve your goals? What if they cared enough to get to know you? What if they weren't successful unless you were? What if your financial well-being drove everything they did? Come see why things are different at Connexus. Stop by any branch to learn more about how Connexus cares. The Saskatchewan Podcast Network is also supported by Direct West. Is marketing getting in the way of running your business? Direct West has a local, expert team right here in Saskatchewan that will work with you to build your website exactly how you imagine it. Let them help you improve your online presence and head to directwest.com to learn more. Now let's pick things up with Tim. I want to talk about road trips, because I was thinking about this recently, is just, some great road trips that I've been on. Take me through to one that comes to mind for you when you were a kid, let's say.
Well, when I was a kid, we were just talking about that station wagon.
Yeah.
That 70 Pontiac wagon. And my dad and my uncles and all of my cousins, we all went one year on a trip to BC. We went out camping to Sicamous and Salmon Arm and Radium Hot Springs and places like that. And that's probably my first real recollection of a road trip.
Yeah.
And I spent most of it, of course, sleeping in the back of that Pontiac wagon and in between those two seats. That was kind of my home. In fact, I didn't want to sleep in the camper. I'd rather have slept in the car.
You towed a camper with the car?
We towed a camper with the car. Yeah, we had a little, one of those crank-up tent trailers.
Sure.
And my Uncle Murray had a crank-up tent trailer also and towed that with his Plymouth Fury two-door. And my Uncle Clarence also had a Ford Torino. He had the only car in the whole family that had air conditioning. And it was a company car. It was a Grand Torino. If I had to think the year, it would have been 1975 or 76. I would have been, 8 or 9 years old, 7, 8, 9 years old in there. So, but a great time. A great time. And I can remember the dads and uncles setting those trailers up, in these campsites. And the car, you'd park the trailer, then move the car so that everything would fit, of course, in these campsites, and then crank those trailers up. And there was a cooler on every picnic table and full of beer and hamburgers ready at the ready, So, yeah, great times and great traveling in that car also. I mean, the cars were so big. That station wagon had just oodles of room. And my uncle's car, I mean, he had 3 kids. I had 3 cousins. And that entire family of 5 towed a trailer from here to BC with that 1973 Plymouth Fury two-door. Mm-hmm. So that's just how people camped and lived.
It's right. Yeah, it's totally different now,
Yeah.
But I have a good road. It certainly wasn't our first road trip, but it's probably the one that stands out in my mind the most. And I have an aunt and uncle who live in Whitehorse in the Yukon.
Wow.
And so summer of grade 11, between grade 11 and grade 12, I had my learner's license, because I didn't turn 16 till August, just before grade 12. Just before grade 11. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's the summer of grade 10, 11. Sorry, let me get that right. Anyways, I've got my learner's license, and it's another station wagon story. It was our second Ford Taurus station wagon, forest green, and we drove all the way to Whitehorse. And in fact, we went past there and went to Dawson City.
Okay, wow.
Which is another 8 hours beyond that.
Yeah.
So I did get to do some driving in that, I mean, not the crazy stuff.
Right.
But I remember that it was the summer that, I don't know, this is a weird memory, but it was the summer that Shania Twain put out a new CD.
Okay.
And our Taurus, we bought it used. So it was about maybe 2 years. At the time of this trip, I want to say it was probably 4 years old. I think we bought it when it was about 2 years old. And somebody, whoever ordered it, I mean, it was a mid-level car. So it had air tilt and cruise and power windows and locks and a power driver's seat. But somebody picked the 6-disc CD changer that you could get in it. But it went in the trunk. So there was a cubby. When you open the hatch, there was a cubby on the right side of the trunk that normally just had a little door and was just storage.
Yeah.
But in our car, had a 6-disc changer in there.
I remember those. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I remember we must have wore that Shania Twain CD out. It's kind of an embarrassing memory, but it was good music at the time. And
nothing wrong with Shania Twain.
That's right. And so we listened to that a lot. And I remember we got, at some point you get on the Alaska Highway, and that was at the moment they were still finishing it being paved. Like, it hadn't been done yet. This is very early 2000s, so it wasn't even quite paved. It was gravel in some stretches, and there was construction work going on. And there was a guy we kept sort of meeting up with at these construction zones, and he was on a motorcycle. And we started talking with him, and it turns out he was from the UK, Britain somewhere. Wanted to do this crazy thing. So I think he took off like half a year from work, like 6 months sabbatical. He bought a bike. I always forget what they're called. They're kind of a half dirt bike, half street bike sort of thing.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Anyways, kind of meant for off-road, but they're still street legal.
Some sort of tour, yeah.
Yeah. Anyways, he started from the very tip of South America.
Wow.
And he was driving north.
Yeah.
As far as roads go.
Yeah.
So basically to the Arctic Circle and then to the Arctic Ocean.
Yeah.
You can't get to the North Pole by motorcycle, but as far as the roads go. So top to bottom of the world.
Man.
Or bottom to top. And so we'd meet up with him, and he had everything on this motorcycle.
Yeah.
And I think he kind of camped along the way. The crazy thing is, he had one arm.
Wow.
He only had one arm. So he had lost it in an accident or something like that.
How did he shift the bike?
Well, he had everything installed he had his right arm.
Yeah.
So he had everything installed on the right-hand side.
Wow.
So I think he had his clutch and his brake on the right-hand side.
On the right-hand side. Okay,
and he somehow managed, and he might have had... or he had a clutch put on the foot, which might have been what he had too. His left foot might have been, no, you have to shift with your left foot. What am I saying? There was a double up of something somewhere. It was either on the handlebars, or he had a clutch and a brake on his right foot, because you're always shifting with your left foot, right? Oh,
sure. Could have had it done up anyway. Maybe a jockey shift, or who knows?
Something, it was customized.
Yeah.
The craziest part is we would kind of meet up with him. We'd all get going, and he was, like most bikes do, they go past you.
Yeah.
He'd ride past us, recognize our green station wagon, and he'd wave.
Yeah.
There's nobody driving the bike for a split second. He'd put up his hand, wave, and put his arm back down on the steering on the handles.
Makes you feel kind of important,
right? But man, there was that trip. There was so many cool things to see along the way. I guess this is kind of an advocate for that road trip, because there were these hot springs out in the middle of nowhere, these wild hot springs you could go to, and all these different things. But I remember getting up into the more northern part of BC, because you kind of cross through Alberta, and then you skirt the corner of BC, and you get into the Yukon.
Yeah.
Sort of a diagonal across the country. And getting into BC, and this is, early 2000s, and my dad just hit the roof when he saw gas for $1 a liter.
Oh no.
Because in Saskatchewan it was 70 something at the time.
Yeah.
In Alberta, the other half of the trip, it was like 58 or something like that, 60 cents a liter. And by the time we got up there, It was $1 a liter up there.
Yeah, I mean, the world is coming to an end.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Oh man.
yeah, and man, $1 a liter now seems like a treat, right? But back then that was big money.
It does. It sure sounds like a treat now for sure.
But up there, you fill up every chance you get.
Right.
So once you get a certain point up the Alaska Highway, and certainly past Whitehorse, when you're up in that kind of part of the country, you don't like wait till you're down to a quarter tank to find a gas station. Every small place that has a gas station, you get gas.
Yeah, that's right.
Because you never know if the next one is going to have any or not.
Yeah.
Because sometimes they don't. The fuel truck makes it only so far up the highway before the fuel truck's empty.
Yeah.
And the next gas station doesn't have any fuel. So it was... But man, and it's 30 hours one way to Whitehorse.
Holy mackerel.
And then another 8 up to Dawson City, which is the coolest place you've ever seen in your life, though.
Oh, man.
It is something else.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so cold there most of the year that the buildings from the gold rush are there. The wooden buildings that were part of the gold rush, that were built as part of that, are still used to this day.
Would they be perfectly preserved?
They
right?
are,
And they're frozen.
They're frozen.
Yeah.
So they don't rot.
Yeah.
Even some of the ones that are abandoned are still sort of leaning over but standing, you know.
Right.
So that was a pretty cool road trip. And I did get to do some driving, but there was one moment. There's a lot of wildlife on that highway. So, you know, once you get up into the Yukon and in Alaska, there are still wild herds of bison that roam around up there. And, of course, bears and moose and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But we were coming. My mom was driving for a little while. And I just sort of remember, you know, when you're like a kid and you're asleep in the back of the car. And every so often you kind of get woken up a little bit. And your one eye opens and you peek around a little bit. And then you shut it and you're kind of back asleep, you know.
Yep.
So I remember hearing this. And we were like onto a bridge, an old trestle bridge, kind of like the Victoria Bridge in Saskatoon.
Okay, yeah.
Big old steel bridge. And we were on that, and okay, yeah, that's cool, whatever. Mom's driving along and singing to Shania Twain, and pretty much the rest of us are asleep.
Yeah.
Well, we're kind of rounding a corner on the highway, and there's rock wall just to our right, and basically a cliff off the left side. So it's like you got a 2-lane road, and it's all you got.
Right.
Rock and cliff. We all woke up screaming because she gets around the corner and screams at the top of her lungs and hammers the brakes because there's one of those white mountain goats had come down the side of the rocks on the right side and was standing there in the middle of the road.
Oh, no.
So we all woke up with our seatbelts half choking us to death.
How's the brakes?
How's the brakes? And the ABS had cut in and everything. Like, I mean, you got to push the brake pretty hard to do that on dry pavement, right?
Yeah, for sure.
The car stopped. Nothing happened, but it was just it was one of those funny moments we laugh at now, but it was terrifying when it happened.
I bet it was. I'm sure she's still terrified.
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And I ended up owning that car a little later on, you know, like, so kind of down the road, I sort of needed a car and mom and dad wanted a new one. So I bought it from them and drove that around for a long time. And
I think everybody's had a hand-me-down car, at least one family car that's been handed down, a grandparent's car or something.
Did you? What did you have that was handed down?
My grandpa's 1977 Ford LTD. That was, I bought that car from my grandpa. When he bought his last car, he bought a little station wagon because by then they were getting quite elderly. And he needed a little station wagon. He needed a smaller car also because they lived in a condo with underground parking. And he had taken out the gyprock on one of their pillars one too many times and maybe had been spoken to. But with this LTD. So anyway, I bought my grandpa's Ford LTD and just loved it for a whole year. Maybe 2 years, I think I had that car. Beautiful car. Brown, bench seat in the front. Yeah.
Brown.
They were all like all of them, yeah.
The wagon I had for a while, and we had, I don't know, 230,000 kilometers on it. But this is a few years ago, I want to say 2013 or 14. Mm-hmm. Finally, though, it was starting to give me issues. And the issues were emissions things and check engine lights. And you think,
sure.
Oh, yeah, check engine light, whatever, you can drive with that on. That's fine. But in this case, it was causing like stumbling, and it wouldn't want to idle anymore. And I was just
Yeah.
Didn't want to keep throwing parts at it. It was already getting to be an old car, and
The tech was starting to go.
yeah, that's that electronic stuff. I mean, that old 6-disc CD changer still worked in the back, but some of the other things were just getting to be gremlins, and I was like, I think I'm ready for not a wagon,
Yeah, for sure.
Because I was a young guy at the time. Was like, let's drive something cooler than this.
Everybody wants to get a fresh car once in a while, right?
Yeah, exactly. Although there's parts of me now, where I kind of go, I could, like, damn, I got this thing to haul. I could really use that wagon right now.
Oh, I know.
Big long items.
Yep.
You could, you could put an armoire. We could, like, the furniture we hauled in that car.
Oh,
everything went into it.
All sorts of stuff in those, those old wagons for sure.
And that's a small wagon compared to the one you grew up in.
The one I grew up in, those wagons were all designed to hold 4x8 sheets of plywood.
Holy
That was
cow.
basically how they designed the car. Well, you can just go to your home center or whatever if you're renovating your house and load everything in your station wagon. They all had two-way tailgates. The clamshell wagons were different, of course, but our station wagons, that Pontiac and that Ford, and the Oldsmobile wagons that my dad had after that, had the two-way tailgate. It either swung open, or you could drop the glass, put the window down in the very back, and you could drop it like a tailgate in a truck.
Right.
They were all like that. Yeah. And with the tailgate dropped, you could hang all sorts of stuff out the back.
Yeah, that's pretty neat.
Yeah, and Dad often did.
Were they a power window that took them down?
Yes. Yeah,
really?
They were power, but some of them were crank windows. I believe on Dad's cars, because Dad liked nice cars, they were probably all power windows in Dad's cars. But I do remember people pulling out that latch, and then they would crank the window down. And that you had to crank the window down before you could lift the gate, because the handle to put the gate down was all the way on the inside.
That was actually kind of a smart way to do it.
Well, a very smart way to do it.
Didn't bust the glass out of it
No,
trying to open your door.
I saw glass knocked out of so many of those poor station wagons because a person would leave that glass up just a half inch or a quarter of an inch. We did that on a friend's car, and I can't even remember what we were putting in the back, but the glass was up just high enough. Something bounced on top of the glass, and when we went to put the glass up, it just went crunch, 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 crunch inside the door, and it all collapsed, and tempered glass had just fallen inside the tailgate. So go and explain that one to Dad. So
now you do some modern road trips these days, right?
Yeah.
Like with your job.
Yeah, I've done a few road trips lately. It's still fun making road trips, even if they're in Saskatchewan. I've seen a few places that I've never seen Estevan until this year.
Yeah.
And I've seen it now twice. And it's actually a neat experience driving through southern Saskatchewan.
Yeah, it is. It's different, right? I mean, it really flattens out and
it does.
Really gets wide open there.
Well, it's like corner gas. It's just like that because you're not really that far from that town of Rollo.
Mm-hmm.
And looks just like that. It's what all the Easterners complain about. It's just miles and miles of
nothing.
But there's no trees or mountains or anything to obstruct the view.
No. Do you ever get? This is going to sound funny, maybe, but I get excited for a road trip. Like I kind of get. There's a sort of a feeling of sense of adventure when you're getting ready for one, or maybe for you it's kind of you're told and hey you're going to such and such a place to pick up a car. Are you excited for them?
Well, I don't know if anybody's ever really excited to go to Regina, for example, but it's kind of nice to go out. You kind of go out and see the sunrise, right? Nice to be out. Other times, other trips, when the weather is miserable, now it's winter, the trips aren't maybe quite as nice when you're spending 3 hours to go to, say, Lloydminster because the highways are icy or something like that. So
what have you discovered about some cars you've liked or not liked with the road trips you've done?
Well, we were talking before. I went to Winnipeg and I drove home a Chevy Spark. And a lot of people would probably think, well, that must have sucked, but it didn't. And I told you before, like, I know what I hate because I've driven a million different cars. And I just didn't hate that car. I couldn't hate it. It was actually a neat little car, and it really grew on me. And a bloody seat was comfortable. It was a comfortable car. It's no powerhouse. It's not a V8 muscle car.
Nope.
It's not a giant truck. It's got a small fuel tank. But I tell you, you fill it up for, $20 or $30 and you drive it for 400 kilometers, nothing to complain about that.
Nope, that's right.
I thought that those were just city-only cars, but nope, you can totally take that on a cross-country road trip and be relatively comfortable.
Well, you know, my wife and I have, as our second car, a Honda Fit.
Mm-hmm.
And I've always thought, you know, this car is so, like that. The Spark is they're definitely comparable little cars. The Fit is a little bit bigger than a Spark, just by a smidge. But the handling on the Fit is just second to none. And there are gleaming reviews from Car and Driver the year that my car came out as, you know, like a top 10 pick and the best handling little car that there is, and, you know, at the time. So it really is fun. Like it's not super fast or super powerful, but it's like it's on rails. It just drives around corners like that.
Right.
And so we last summer got this bright idea. Let's go to the mountains for a weekend. It was just like a September weekend thing. We just, we were sick of COVID and numbers were okay at the time, so let's just go get a little getaway.
Mm-hmm.
And we drove the Fit all the way to Banff and got phenomenal fuel mileage. Like 5.5 liters per 100 kilometers in that thing on the highway, and especially through the mountains. And then I just threw it up and down the mountains, all the mountain roads. Like we had an absolute ball in it because, and like, you know, is it quite as comfortable as our main highway car? No. Mm-hmm. But it's certainly doable. Like it's not like it's not like you're sitting on a, you know.
Well, it's the same thing as with that Spark. I thought it was going to be a terrible trip driving. That's an 8-hour trip.
Yep.
But it wasn't that bad at all.
Nope.
The seat wasn't that uncomfortable. You got out and stretch once in a while, but you would do that on any road trip. The thing I loved about that car the most was the stereo. That thing, remember when I said a Tesla was like driving an iPad? Well, this thing was like driving a Harman Kardon stereo. It was just awesome.
Really?
It synced up right away. I just synced my cell phone up with it and started,
playing
tunes.
Yep.
And stuff, and it's got an awesome stereo.
Really?
Yeah.
That's
so if
cool.
it had any road noise, who cares?
You just turn it up louder.
Turn it up because it sounded awesome. Yeah. I've been in some pretty expensive cars that had a stereo that didn't sound any better than this one.
Yes. I know.
Kind of higher end, BMW type cars, and that's the little Chevy Spark had a pretty good stereo.
That's funny.
Yeah.
But Chevy though for a long time has had good stereos.
Oh, I agree. Yeah. They're good in all of the cars.
Chevrolet has had some reliability or other issues with different other things on their cars in years gone by. But even yanking an old, stereo unit out of a 90s Chevy, an 80s Chevy, late 80s Chevy, and into the 90s and into the 2000s, man, you could just hook that thing up and they sounded good right out of the box.
Oh,
they really did. Whatever they used for amplifiers and the technology they used, it sounded good.
Yeah, some of the older, my 87 Cadillac Fleetwood had a Delco Bose. It was called a cassette player.
Yeah.
And there were speakers in the door, speakers in the dash, speakers in the back. There's no subwoofer, of course. It was predated subwoofers, but wow, that thing had a pretty incredible sound.
Yep.
It said concert sound or something was stamped in the speakers in the door. Through that Tiffany carpet, you could see it. And but no, even you pop in your April Wine Greatest Hits cassette, and it sounded just like the day it was brand new. It sounded awesome.
They did.
Yeah.
Ford, on the other hand, was awful for a long time. My that 06 Ford Focus I told you about, that had a Sony stereo, so it was pretty good, but it was definitely a big upgrade that you paid for, had a sub in the trunk and all that kind of stuff. But I mean, like 80s and 90s stuff, those two Tauruses that we had when I was a kid, especially the first one was an 89 Taurus. Oh, that radio was just terrible.
Oh, no.
Like zero. It was clear, sure, but there was just no bass whatsoever to it. And you turn it up too loud, it starts to crackle, they were just not good.
Yeah.
Ford's changed since then, but
well, the 90s about when music started to get bassy also.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right, totally.
Sure.
But man, I mean, like if you compare a GM stereo and a Ford stereo out of those same, take 1988 or take 1992 or something.
Oh, sure.
Oh, GM wins by a landslide, no doubt.
They did. Even my old Marquis, I can't get every time I try to play an 8-track in my quadrasonic stereo, it eats the bloody tape. I don't know how many more Paul Williams 8-tracks I have left.
That's hilarious. I wonder too, it makes me think of as I was growing up, the big thing, and probably when you were growing up too, is the same thing. It's just different technology, is to put a custom stereo in your car, right?
Yes.
I mean,
that's because the stock ones were so horrible.
They were terrible, right? And same thing, when I was a kid, it was about, putting a subwoofer in the trunk and,
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Maybe you could call it following the sort of Fast and the Furious trend,
Yep.
Because that was certainly kind of part of how I grew up. That was a big part of cars, right?
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Same with us.
I am.
Yeah, amps and 6x9s.
Right, amps and 6x9s for you, and me, it's head units and subwoofers.
Yep.
That was the big thing. But I think that industry is probably just about down the toilet. Because of this reason, everything is so integrated now, right?
Yes.
Like think of even that little Spark, right? Had a touch screen in it, right?
Yep.
So you can't just go rip that out and put a deck in there because 3/4 of the functions of the car happen on that screen.
They all happen on the touch screen.
So
even if you go back cars 10, 15 years, you can't alter the stereo because even the chimes for the ignition work off of the central stereo.
That's right.
Yeah. So,
it's all one piece. It's not just a radio sitting there.
Exactly. There
It's
is no plug and play when it comes to the stereo. It is, like you say, totally integrated.
The only thing I suppose that you can do is you can pop the door panels off and, replace the speakers. And then I suppose you could, take the output of that stereo you've got now, put a new amplifier in there, and then power your new speakers and sort of change it that way.
Well, really, I mean, us old school kind of hot rodders might do that, and I'd take my old Craig cassette deck that I still have in a box in my basement, and screw it up underneath the dash of a new Tesla and wire in some speakers, just run the wire on the outside. And I could still listen to April Wine cassettes in my Tesla, but why bother? Because everything, you can press a button and tell it to play April Wine and it'll just play it.
Yeah, that's right. I'd say, hey, Google, do something right now, but one of our phones would probably start doing that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Exactly.
And stuff isn't going away like that, right? I mean, it's so integrated now. It's never going to go back the way it was with changing stereos out. And
no, and you know what? That's probably a good thing. I can remember changing stereos out. My cousin Dean and I almost burnt down a '86 Cutlass Supreme in my dad's driveway. Putting an amp in under the seat or something. I vaguely remember, and that's a lot of work changing a stereo. You got to have pretty dexterous fingers. I'm sure I'm going to have arthritis the rest of my life from trying to change out car stereos all the time in the 80s and 90s.
I learned something, and maybe this makes me a total noob, but I was trying to figure out in my car, my old Buick, because there's an option for an 8-track player. Now, I don't have it, and there's also option for FM. Mm-hmm. Mine just has an AM radio, but I do have the optional rear trunk, like rear speaker. Because it has one mounted in the dashboard up in the center, right? And then apparently in the trunk, getting one in the back was an option.
Yep.
Okay, so it's got that. Just not a left and right, just a single in the front, single in the back. So I'm wondering, I was under there once, kind of putting a tachometer into my car and doing some wiring, and I got to see the wires that lead to the back of the radio. And I'm looking, and I'm like, there's 3. Just 3. Mm-hmm. I've seen lots of new radios and there's like a connector with 12 wires in it,
Yeah.
Literally there's 3. And there's a power. Ground is provided by just screwing it into the car. Mm-hmm. And there's a wire to the front speaker, a wire to the back speaker. And then, of course, ground happens over there. Mm-hmm. And then the plug for the antenna.
Right.
But I'm trying to figure out how the heck you connected an 8-track player to play through the radio. And then it was finally explained to me. They're separate.
They are separate. Yeah.
Right?
The accessory would have been mounted under the dash somewhere.
But it also had its own amplifier. and then you ran wires to other speakers, right?
I would assume so. I can't. I don't know.
I guess that's it. I've finally read about it. Is like you had your speakers for the radio and maybe your one speaker for the radio in the dash, and then you ran 2 wires to the back and you put 2 6x9s in the trunk, hanging from the back deck.
Yep.
So theoretically you could have them both on. Right? You could basically turn the radio on, it would come through the front speaker. You could play the 8-track player, it'd come through the back speakers. They were separate systems. They weren't integrated into the same thing like, say, the cassette deck in your Grand Marquis, where it's part of the radio. Because when you play a tape, the radio doesn't play.
Yeah.
That's not how it worked in the Buick. It was just simply an 8-track player with its own amplifier and own volume control built into it.
That's strange. That's the first time I've ever heard of that.
Yeah.
Well, I didn't know that either until you just talked about it now. And you're absolutely right. My Marquis, it eats a tape and the radio isn't playing while it's eating the tape.
Right.
So, yeah.
But that's because it's integrated in all one, right?
Right.
The tape player is part of the radio head unit.
Right.
The whole thing.
It is the whole thing.
At Buick Land in 1969, that wasn't a possibility. You mounted the 8-track player hanging below the bottom of the dashboard, and it was just simply another piece that got wired in with a connecting wire from the key, ignition source power, and grounded itself to the dashboard, and couple new speakers, and you had an 8-track player.
Well, how many people did that with CB radios in the 70s?
Well, same thing.
When CBs were so popular, my Delta 88 has a CB radio in it. Radio Shack, mounted up underneath the dash with an antenna. You got to mount on the trunk, a magnetic one. So, but some car manufacturers made the CB right from the factory.
They did, yeah.
The luxury cars were pretty popular with those.
Have you ever seen one?
Yes.
In person? Really?
In person. Oh, yeah. I've seen a number of them. I have. There's a fella used to be a customer there at work, and he had about a 77 or 78 Cadillac Eldorado with a factory CB. And you could tell on the antenna mast, the power antenna had a little kind of a thing looked like a chapstick right in the middle of the antenna. And that was the CB antenna integrated into the car's power antenna.
Really?
And then it had a funny looking head unit with dials on it, and then it had another dial on the actual handset, and it had the factory cradle to put the handset, and everything was right there and it looked factory.
That's phenomenal.
And Cadillacs, Lincolns had them as an option also in the late 70s.
Here's another thing that just to switch gears one more time, Tim, and I didn't tell you about this before we got sat down, but another thing I thought we could also talk about today, and I know you know tons of stuff about this, more than I ever will, is I really love obscure, odd, strange, and special automotive options.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Like, I'll start with one, and then see if you can come up with one. 1969, Chevrolet in the Impala offered liquid tire chains.
Yes. Yeah.
And it was a canister mounted inside the rear fenders with a little electronic solenoid attached to it. And you bought these cans. They were like a spray can.
Yeah.
Just with no nozzle on them.
They were full of glycol or something.
Yeah. It was kind of an alcohol blend with some other stuff.
Yep.
And the idea was you were slipping and sliding. The rear tires of your Impala weren't grabbing the ice very well. And, snow tires, there was winter lug tires, but there was not really, soft compound snow tires like what we have now.
Right.
The idea was hit the button on the dashboard for the liquid tire chains, and it would spray on each wheel this sort of concoction, and it would melt the ice as it was driving, plus rid the tires of any ice and snow.
Yeah.
And sort of get traction back a little bit more. And it was like a 1 or possibly 2 year option.
Maybe 2 years because it didn't work.
6970, yeah.
Yeah. It was available on Camaros also.
Was it?
It was, yeah. And theoretically it melted the ice. You can imagine when it's minus 30. I don't think there's any concoction. And this thing's mounted in the trunk. Would it work? It might get you out of a jam. Who knows? I don't know how much of that stuff would have been in those canisters, but what a cool option. I would love to see a car from the factory with that.
I did find somebody post, it wasn't a recent post, but there was a post on social media of somebody who had a box of new old stock liquid tire chain cans.
No way.
From a GM dealership.
Yeah.
Unused, ready to go for that system.
Man.
Which that would be worth like as rare as hen's teeth now, right? I mean, like to find those.
Would. For sure, especially when it was only offered as an option for maybe it was only 1 year.
And who bought it anyways?
Yeah.
You know, probably most people were like, that's stupid. You know, they just skipped it. So I imagine like maybe 2% of the cars they sold had that option. You know, probably something super low.
They were likely ordered by dealers just to have on site in stock, and then they could show customers right there, right? This car's ready to go with all of this stuff. And yeah.
So give me one of your favorites. I know you know a million of these.
Oh, my favorite might be, you were saying 1969 Dodge, the Super I. The Super I was the very first, I think you would call it a halogen or a super light. And it had one kind of cycloptical light. It had the standard 4 headlights in the front, but it had one light offset, and that was the super light. And when you turned that on, that sucker was super, super bright.
Oh,
in fact,
really?
I think what did that light in was it was outlawed in most of the state because it was too bright.
Really?
Yeah, the Dodge Super I, it was called. And it was either a halogen or like an LCD bulb or whatever, but just space age technology available only from Dodge, right? so yeah, it's that's actually kind of a neat thing to see if you've ever seen one. I only saw one car equipped with that. It was at an auction out in Okotoks a number of years ago. The Dodge.
I'm going to have to look that up. Yeah.
The auctioneer had mentioned the Super I, and I had to look it up. So I did. I looked it up, and I was like, wow, that's kind of cool. There's you can see online, there's advertising literature and stuff for those Super Is.
There's lots of features, in talking about odd and unique options. But, man, there's lots of features in cars I'm thinking of that just don't exist anymore. When's the last time we saw a new car with opera lights?
Yeah.
That's gone away. There's lots of stuff like that. That's
a lot
just
of the styling things
disappeared.
Changed. Yeah, they changed just like fashion changes. It's suits and ties were the norm in the 80s for business executives. When was the last time you saw people wearing suits and ties, especially a high-powered executive? I don't think Elon Musk has ever worn a tie. Same with Jeff Bezos. Have you ever seen these guys wearing suits?
No, exactly.
But yeah, same thing like Landau tops.
Oh yeah,
Padded
that's a good
vinyl
one.
tops.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Opera lights is a good one. Stand-up hood ornaments.
Oh,
When's the last time you saw a stand-up hood ornament?
Well, Mercedes. They've still got one.
That's right, too.
But they've gotten special permission, I believe, to continue with that because the whole reason they were kind of gotten rid of was pedestrian safety. And I think somehow they managed to get away with keeping the Mercedes standing.
Well, they're all collapsible, and the Mercedes is round. It's
I think that was the idea. It's not going to skewer you.
My cars are kind of jagged, but they're all collapsible also. And who cares about pedestrians?
Do you remember when cars like companies like Mercedes and BMW offered car phones built in the 90s?
I do. I remember that new. I started my job in 1999, and BMW offered cars with phones, all everything was all pre-installed at the factory, and it was a flip phone, and it was that was hyper technology. It's
kind of funny because that option is completely illegal now, right?
Yes, yeah.
Like even in the United States of America, most states you can't drive with a cell phone. There's at least tickets for it. Here it's majorly illegal, right? Distracted driving.
Yeah.
And yet it was an option to equip your car with a phone you'd have to hold to your ear with a hand.
Right
from the factory.
Yeah. Well, people could still hold a phone to their ear and drive. There was no texting, of course, in 1999. People didn't. There was texting, but it was too much of a nuisance to text. Everybody remembers Blackberries and,
Oh, that first T9 texting was awful. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, you certainly wouldn't do that when you were trying to drive. I think even modern millennials wouldn't attempt to do that while they're trying to drive. It's like having a typewriter on your lap and driving at the same time. It just doesn't work. So, but the phones, it's interesting you bring that up because now, of course, holding a cell phone up to your ear is illegal. They want you paying attention to the road.
That's right.
So, yeah. So that's why you want to memorize where those buttons are in your steering wheel so you don't have to pay too much attention to the screens and stuff in the car.
Here's one for you. I think it was 1956 or 57 Cadillac had the optional bar included in the glove box.
Yep.
And you got 4 tumblers.
They're all magnetized.
And they were magnetized so they would stick to your glove box door, which acted as a serving tray, basically. Mm-hmm. So basically it is go ahead and drink and drive.
Well, of course. Well, you can make highballs. It's not like drinking beer and driving. It's you making actual liquor highballs.
I know.
You know? So, speaking of illegal, and then they thought cell phones were bad.
Here's your bar on the road, right, in the Cadillac,
sure.
right?
So I always like seeing the old highway hi-fis are kind of neat to watch.
Yeah.
It's a weighted record player that would play records in your car, and the records were very, very, everything in that system was very heavy. In fact, the records played upside down on the needle, and the weight kept it from skipping as you were driving.
The needle pointed upwards from the bottom.
The needle points upwards from the bottom.
And the heavy record. Now, could you play just anything? Could you play just any 45, or they had to be highway hi-fi records?
Seems to me you had to get highway hi-fi records for those. You know, someone in the previous generation of mine would know a little bit more.
Yeah, they would.
And but I always thought it was kind of neat to have a record player in your car. And just imagine now, and you can't, Wi-Fi goes down in the car or whatever, and you can't listen to tunes for half an hour. But in the 50s, it was a super luxury to be able to listen to one song only, before you had to change the record out.
That's right.
It was a 45. You could only play one song.
Well, but even, up until then, think about this. In the history of the car, you had a radio. Radios came out as early as the 30s in cars. But you never could control exactly what you were listening to. You might be able to choose the station you were listening to. Mm-hmm. That's true. But what was on the radio was on the radio. Can you imagine being the sort of the first guy or gal in the mid-50s to get a highway hi-fi, and I get to be my own DJ?
Yeah.
I get to choose what music is playing in this car. That would have been revolutionary. We think of that as so mundane, now, like you said. Just, if I can't pick the tunes, I'm,
of course,
losing my mind. They were people at that time were just beside themselves because they could choose their own music.
Oh, sure.
Because it wasn't until you got home to your record player sitting on your stereo that you could actually pick the record you wanted to listen to.
Yep, absolutely.
There was no portable music whatsoever except for a radio.
No, that's right.
So to be your own... have your own choice was probably spectacular to that generation of people.
It was spectacular. Well, it was even spectacular to my generation because, having a cassette player, my first car didn't have a cassette player, it just had an AM radio.
Yep.
And, if you wanted a cassette player, well, those cost money. It was expensive.
Uh-huh.
So, the buddies that had the cars with the cassette players, those were the cars everybody went cruising in because you could, you didn't have to listen to the radio because radio in the 80s, despite what anybody says, was horrible. They played Cher and Wham all the time over and over again.
Wang Chung?
Oh, yeah, the Culture Club and Madonna. It was just never ending. So people who wanted to listen to real rock like AC/DC and Judas Priest, you had to buy, you bought the records, then you made mixtapes.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So you mixed your own cassettes.
Oh, I did that too when I was a kid. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And then there was always the one buddy who would mix and had his favorite song, and the whole cassette was the same song over and over and over again. So
of one song. Yeah.
Of one song. I had one friend who did that, and but no, the cassette player in the car. You betcha, you were the DJ, and that was you were the life of the party if you had the cassette player in the car.
When I met my wife, we were in high school, and she had a 1989 Pontiac Sunbird, 4-door flavor.
Yeah,
and it was
little J body.
Yeah, it was kind of a turd. It was sort of an old, worn out by the time she got it. But it had the neatest cassette player I've ever seen. So good sounding GM radio in the dashboard. But at that, for whatever reason, they took the cassette player out of the head unit and they stuck it further down as its own piece in the center console.
Oh, yeah.
Because it kind of had a stacking kind of center console ahead of the shifter.
Yep.
So it was kind of more closer to the bottom.
Yep.
It was a cassette player by itself. But it was fascinating because, and I don't know, I have to look up what exactly they called it. It had a skip function. So you could put a tape into that thing, and you could be playing a song, and like a CD player, you could go, I don't want to listen to this one, I want the next one. And you could push the skip button, and it would fast forward the tape to the next blank space in the tape.
Yeah, between songs.
Between songs.
I remember those.
Stop and play from there.
Yeah.
Like, I'd never seen that before. Every other thing we ever had that played tapes when I was a kid, like you were like, fast forward play, you know? And you'd just keep skipping it ahead a little bit until you found, skipping through the song you were in until you found the next blank space to play the song.
Yeah.
And it would do it on its own. Then after about 3 months, it would just eat tapes. It was done.
Yeah. But space-age technology.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
I didn't know it could do that, you know? Like
it would just stop as soon as it sensed, must have been a little sensor or something
must
in there.
Have sensed, no sound.
Yeah.
Something like that. It must have had the head on against the tape, still reading the tape, just
Sure.
really, really fast until it caught nothing, and then it played.
Yeah,
I don't know.
Played.
Pretty neat.
Well, I remember those. I also remember the separate cassette player, too. I had a couple of Chev and GM pickup trucks of that era in the 90s, and the radio was in the dash, but the cassette player was off in the center of the dash. You had to kind of reach, almost inconvenient. You had to reach way over to put a cassette into it. Right in the center of the dash.
Isn't it our friend and cohort Doug Scarrow with that beautiful 1962 or 3 Cadillac Eldorado? Two?
Yeah.
That's maybe not an Eldorado, but
it's
Cadillac
a DeVille,
anyways. It's a DeVille. It's got some pretty neat stuff with its stereo. It has reverb as an option from the factory.
Yep.
It's a little dial that hangs from underneath the dashboard, and it creates like an electronic delay between the front speaker and the rear speaker, just a micro delay. It makes kind of an echoey reverb. So when you got the top up on the Cadillac, it sort of creates this sort of echo sound.
Yeah,
right?
You get the Phil Spector kind of sound.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But it's got an auto sensing, an auto tuning.
Oh yeah.
Right? So he's got on his left side of his floor, he's got the good old push button for the high beams. There's also a button up in there that it's an auto seeking radio.
Yeah.
So you just push it and it starts to scan, mechanically starts to scan for the next station it finds.
Right.
And when it finds the station, it stops.
Yeah.
And then you push it again, it keeps scanning upward. And when it gets to the top, I think it returns and comes down to the bottom. Can you imagine like that? It's 1962, and you've got basically a foot control button to change the station on your radio.
Oh yeah. You do. You don't have to. Why lean way over and turn that dial?
Just click your foot.
Just click your foot. Clickety click. Some of those cars had very advanced options even in the early 60s. The headlight dimmer was another one. You could have your high beams on all the time, and they would automatically dim.
Yep.
So I had a Lincoln like that with a dimmer, and the only problem with those is when they started using those reflective street signs and the reflective road markers and road signs. Every time I came up to one of those, the sensor picked up the reflection from the sign and would dim the lights. And as soon as the lights were dim, there was no longer reflection on the sign, so the high beams would come back on. And you ended up with click, 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 click. And if God help you, if there's a car coming towards you, they'd want your head on a pike, So I eventually got to the point where I just never used it. But I blame the road signs for that.
Well, and you know what? They didn't have reflective road signs at the time.
No, I don't think they did.
They might have been slightly reflective, maybe.
Well, yeah,
but a lot of them,
like modern signs.
No, and a lot of them in the 70s and stuff, and into the 80s.
Yep.
They were just paint. They were just painted.
Yeah, painted signs.
And that was it.
Yeah,
so
maybe
that makes
a little
sense.
bit of reflective material, but yeah, the signs today, like I say, it would when your high beams are on, that sign is there.
That's hilarious. I learned by looking through the manual for my Buick, and I think this is pretty fascinating that they could accomplish this, that an option for my car was the fully automatic climate system.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a section in that book that's really thick, and it belongs to that system, because basically you slide the temperature how did it work? You can still choose where you want the air to come out.
Yep.
So it still does that. there is no fan switch. It's deleted.
Yeah.
And there's just a big slider, and you pick the temperature you want.
Yeah.
So you want it to be 68 degrees Fahrenheit or 72 or 71. And it automatically, I mean, we all know this in modern cars. A lot of us have this in our modern daily drivers, automatic climate control, right?
Yeah.
But think about being able to accomplish that task of measuring the temperature of the air and then calculating, I mean, it's not calculating, it's mechanical, but still being able to react to that to then adjust the temperature internally and adjust the fan speed to accomplish that.
Well, talk about engineering. I mean, engineers had to accomplish that mechanically. And if you've ever seen one of those controllers pulled out of a car like that had climate control, they're very, very complex. It's a very complicated board with springs and things like that react to heat.
Yep.
So those little coil springs, like your thermostat at home, that's basically how they work. They will actuate the heat door and open and close it based on the ambient temperature inside the car.
Yeah.
Very advanced technology, of course, for the time. But nowadays, of course, you're using microprocessors, and we all know these days how reliable that is.
Yeah. I've also read about 1969 again. We're stuck on that year. Cadillac had come out with heated seats.
Oh, is that right?
Heated seats.
Yeah.
In Cadillac. And I think it was only a few years later, there's a gentleman in Saskatoon, or I think he might live in Warman, and he's got a 74 or 5, maybe it's a 6, one of those three, full-size Cadillac with GM's first airbags.
Yes, I do remember those. I can remember seeing those when I was a kid.
And they're bizarre.
They are bizarre. It's a very strange-looking steering wheel. The cars all had tilt, but the luxury cars that would normally come with telescopic steering didn't have telescopic steering. And the steering wheels were quite ugly, as I recall, to look at, because they looked like if you were to take a steering wheel from a 1995 Taurus and put it into any 70s era GM car with all of the wood appliques and chrome trim everywhere, they just didn't match.
Yeah. And then on the passenger side, there's no glove box. It's gone.
Yeah, no.
Because the everything that takes up all the computer technology, I use quote marks around that, was housed over there, and then the big passenger airbag was set into the dashboard. They couldn't really figure out where to put the glove box. They were out of space.
Right.
So, and especially with the way how big ductwork was back then, like now they can run ducts for air and heating in just tiny little spaces because of, the way they're able to design it. But back then it was, big tubes that the heating system ran through.
Yeah.
So the dashboard was full. No glove box. No,
exactly. And I mean, GM actually marketed those cars quite extensively, but people just didn't want them. For one reason or another, they just didn't sell. They let the consumers determine that option, that desirability, or whatever you want to call it, that option, and people didn't buy it, so they just kind of shelved it until the government started mandating it, after a while. But the technology, airbag and safety technology has been around since the 60s and 70s for sure.
I don't know if I'd trust it anymore. And what I mean is, if I was the owner of that car, I'd probably have those disconnected.
I wouldn't trust a 40-year-old airbag. No, I don't even trust Takata airbags in modern cars. Sometimes you hear the odd story of someone going off by accident. Someone hits a bird on the highway and the airbag goes off, and Buddy's cigarette is deeply up their nose now, and so. Yeah.
Anything else come to mind of some cool options that you can think of?
Cool options. The Super I was my favorite, and the like you were saying, the guy called the Ice Blaster canisters there from '69. Lando lights, so many options that were so common in the late '60s, early '70s that have basically disappeared. Were all about fashion and comfort. The other option I might bring up is the '67 Chrysler Imperial. You could get a two-door, and it came with an option called the executive option, where the front passenger seat swiveled 180 full degrees and a table folded up from the side panel.
Okay.
And then the boss would sit in the back seat, and the secretary would sit in the front seat, and the driver drove the car, and the secretary could then sit there and dictate or type or do whatever. I'll
Really?
send you a link to that. Yeah, that's
my gosh.
It's very bizarre. 1 year only option. I'm not sure if it was ever really truly offered as an option, but it was definitely marketed.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I've seen advertising on that. I'll see if I can send you a link.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, the Imperial with the executive table and the swivel seat that turned all the way backwards.
First, I think I talked to you recently about this, but the first tourist wagon my family had, the 89, was a high-end, high-spec model, and it had an electric windshield in it.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
And this was pretty cool because, there's new versions of this I think that, like, Volvo, Jaguar, Land Rover use. And if you look at the windshield up close, you can actually see little tiny wires sandwiched in between the layers of glass. So when you're driving in the car, it's actually kind of a bit of a blurry view because they're all in there. This car, however, if you've ever seen a car with kind of a goldish purple hue, a reflection especially in the sunlight, you'd be looking at the car and all the windows would look like glass, but the windshield would look this purple,
like golded
tinted sort of thing. It had this weird reflection. Apparently, there was conductive material used in that layer of stuff they put in between the glass to laminate them, right? That goo that holds the layers together. And basically what would happen is, in park, you'd have it didn't only work in park. It didn't work while you're driving the car. But in park, you start off the old Taurus, fire it up. There was one button on the dash, and there was rear defrost. There was windshield de-ice.
Yeah.
Push it. And the old digital tachometer in the Taurus would rev up to about 2,200 RPM. It would bring the revs up, and you'd hear they had this huge alternator on it.
Oh, of course.
Like, definitely oversized for a V6 in a Taurus. It looked like it belonged on a V8.
Yeah,
like
on a truck.
On
or
a truck.
Yeah, running a bunch of accessories.
A huge alternator, and it generated and current, and it passed current from one side of the windshield through to the other, and just heated up. It just got warm.
Right.
So just create electrical current. It got warm like one big element in your toaster, and all the snow and the ice in the windshield would just trickle off.
Yeah, and it would be instant.
It was only maybe 25 or 30 seconds for that to be warm to the touch. Like if you put your hand on it, it was warm.
Right.
Like it physically warm. Not quite hot.
Yeah.
But certainly warm.
Yeah.
And it was so cool. It worked like the dickens. It was so neat.
Yeah.
It broke one year. We got a rock. It cracked. Stopped working as soon as it cracked.
Yeah.
And I think my mom and dad went to, Ford to see if we can get a new windshield. $2,000 for that windshield. And that's and it was probably, I don't know, $125 for the regular windshield at that time.
Yeah.
So she got a regular windshield after that.
Got a regular windshield for sure. Well, we all can, relate. You don't want to heat up glass too fast when it's bitterly cold. And those windshields did work. They worked amazingly well. And we've all had a stone chip that only really appears into a massive crack the first cold day because you hit the defrost and away that crack goes, So, and you know what? I lived that exact same story with a Lincoln Town car that I had years ago. I had an 86, and that was available as an option. But when I bought the car, it was already switched out.
Oh, really?
So it had already been taken out. When I bought the car, it already had 130,000 kilometers on it or something like that. So, so the windshield was obviously cracked, and they likely did the same thing. $2,000, and just put a standard windshield in it because they were so expensive. Yeah. It's almost as if that gold tint was actually gold.
Well, I don't know. I had to look it up. Maybe it actually was. Maybe it was gold metal.
Gold's a tremendous conductor of electricity.
And it might have been. Yeah. I don't know. Very well. When you were sitting inside the car looking out, the view was no different. It's not like it had a gold reflection inside the car.
Right.
It was just simply from the outside of the car.
Yeah.
But what's fascinating? Once in a while, one will catch my eye here and there. You'll see an old Windstar or an old Lincoln, maybe an old Grand Marquis, because they were offered on all the sort of the higher end stuff.
Right.
And hey, that's got a gold windshield on it.
Yep. Yeah.
Who knows if it still works, but
yeah, who knows? But it's cool that it's still there.
Yeah, definitely. Well, Tim, thanks for joining me for this podcast again. It's been a blast.
So much fun all the time.
You bet.
Yep, for sure.
Well, and I mean, hey, maybe we'll have you again in the future. We'll talk some more cars because we never run out of stuff to talk about. So
we never do, ever. So, no, for sure. Be it the future, the past cars, it's always interesting.
It's endless, exactly. And thank you for listening to Bald Tires. We try to bring this to you as often as we can. Great car memories, that's what it's all about. Because when you make great memories, you make bald tires.